When I got home that Thursday afternoon, my things were already packed in boxes. Cardboard towers stood along the hallway I'd built 50 years ago, the same hallway where my wife used to hang her spring wreaths. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and something final, like a house that stopped waiting. "Dad," my daughter said, her voice soft but rehearsed, "you'll stay in a wonderful place. They take really good care of people your age." Her husband stood behind her, arms folded, eyes avoiding mine. At the window, my grandson, little Ben, pressed his palms against the glass, watching as they rolled my suitcase out the door. He didn't wave. Maybe he didn't know if he should. I looked around the living room, the armchair with the sun-faded patch where I used to read the paper, the old cuckoo clock that still ran 3 minutes fast, the faint mark on the wall from when we measured Ben's height. Every piece of it carried my name, my work, my years. I wanted to ask why now. But I already knew. They'd been talking about changes for weeks, how the baby needed his own room, how the house felt too tight, how they'd find something perfect for me. She said it like she was offering a gift. "Dad, it's near the park. There's a garden, activities, even a little library. You'll like it there." I nodded, not trusting my voice. It wasn't the first time she'd driven me somewhere for care. After my fall last winter, she'd taken me to rehab for a few weeks. Back then, I believed I was coming home. But this time, I could see the difference in her eyes. This wasn't about recovery. It was about making room. As the car pulled away, the house shrank in the side mirror, my house, my years of hammer and sweat and pride, until it was just a shape, smaller than a memory. Ben's silhouette stayed by the window until the curve of the street took him out of sight. The road to the nursing home was lined with autumn trees. The leaves had turned the color of rust, the same shade as the old nails I'd once pulled from the roof. Funny how time works, everything you build eventually gets replaced. But as the car hummed toward that wonderful place, I kept my hand in my jacket pocket, feeling the rough edge of my old pocketknife, the one my wife gave me when we first moved into that house. A small thing, maybe. But it reminded me who I used to be. And that, I thought, might be enough, for now. Tell me, friend, have you ever seen your own life packed neatly into boxes, as if it could be moved like furniture? Drop your city in the comments. Like and subscribe if you've ever had to speak up for yourself in your own family. I built that house with my own 2 hands, plank by plank, back when gas was cheap and my back didn't ache after climbing a ladder. It was 1978, the year my wife, Ellen, and I finally stopped renting and bought the small plot outside Madison. I remember how she stood in the yard, her hair tied in a scarf, holding a mug of coffee while I measured the ground for the foundation. "Make it strong, Hank," she said. "Strong enough to last longer than we do." I tried, sweetheart. I really did. The apple trees along the fence, I planted them myself. Dug through Wisconsin clay until my hands blistered. I wanted those trees to outlive us, to bloom each spring like a promise. For 40 years, they did. Ellen used to bake pies from those apples every September. After she passed, I kept baking them, though the crust never came out the same. When Ellen's heart gave out, my daughter, Melissa, insisted I move in with her family. "It'll be easier, Dad," she said. "You shouldn't be alone." I thought she meant it. And for a while, it was good. I fixed leaky faucets, mowed the lawn, even picked Ben up from school when she had double shifts at the hospital. I paid part of the bills, too. The pension wasn't much, but it covered the groceries and the electric. I thought that meant I was still useful. Still part of something. But over time, the tone changed. Little things first, "Dad, could you keep your tools in the garage?" Or, "Dad, the TV's too loud at night." Then bigger things, "Dad, we're thinking about remodeling," or, "Dad, we might need your room for the baby." I laughed it off. Told myself they were just stressed. Young families have their pressures, student loans, daycare costs, the dream of something better. But I started noticing how Melissa's husband, Eric, avoided talking to me. How he looked uncomfortable when his friends came over and saw me in the recliner. I could almost hear his thoughts, old man doesn't belong here anymore. One Sunday, I overheard them whispering in the kitchen. He's slowing down, Liz. We can't keep tiptoeing around him forever. Her voice cracked, he's my father, Eric. Yeah, but he's not getting younger. We need space. You said yourself this house feels crowded. The next day, she acted normal, smiling, pouring my coffee. But her eyes couldn't meet mine. That's when I realized something I'd never wanted to face: the world doesn't always shove you out. Sometimes, it just quietly moves on without you. I tried to hold my place. Paid the bills ahead of time, fixed the shed, even built a birdhouse with Ben, said it was for his new little brother. He smiled, proud. Grandpa, you make things last, he said. That one sentence, that tiny voice, kept me steady. Until the morning I came home from my doctor's appointment and found those boxes. My whole life, packed into brown cardboard. It wasn't the loss of a room that hurt. It was the loss of meaning. The silent message that my years of labor, my calloused hands, my faithfulness, had all been reduced to clutter. When they dropped me off at the nursing home, the place smelled faintly of disinfectant and canned peaches. The nurse smiled too brightly. You'll love it here, Mr. Carter. We have bingo nights and movie Wednesdays. Bingo. Movie Wednesdays. As if that could fill the space where laughter and purpose used to live. That first night, I sat by the window, watching the lights fade beyond the parking lot. My reflection stared back, an old man in a borrowed room. I thought of Ellen. Of her voice telling me to make it strong enough to last. And I wondered, maybe she wasn't talking about the house at all. The next morning began with the clang of metal carts and the distant hum of a television. Someone down the hall coughed like a machine running out of oil. The air smelled of antiseptic and oatmeal. I'd been here less than 24 hours, and already it felt like time had slowed into something sticky, like honey that never quite drips. The place was called Golden Acres, though there was nothing golden about it. Beige walls, plastic plants, and long corridors that all looked the same. The kind of place where you could wander and never find your way back, not because it's big, but because it has no soul to guide you. Breakfast was served at 7:30 sharp. A woman named Carol wheeled in a tray of scrambled eggs that looked like they'd been poured from a carton. She smiled like it was part of the uniform. Eat up, honey. You'll get used to the routine. Routine. That word echoed. As if that's all life was now, a sequence of managed moments. I sat at a table with 3 other men. None of them spoke at first. One stared at his food, another at his hands. The third, tall, with watery blue eyes and a voice that sounded like gravel, finally said, "You're new." I nodded. Yeah. Just moved in. He gave a small, humorless laugh. Ain't nobody moves in here. They get moved. His name was Walter. A retired mail carrier, same age as me. He'd been here 2 years. My daughter said it'd just be temporary, he said, stirring his eggs without eating. That was 23 months ago. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the squeak of nurses' shoes. Then Walter leaned closer. You'll see it soon enough. Folks here don't talk much. Not because they don't want to, but because it hurts to remember anyone's listening. That evening, I walked the halls. Doors half open showed glimpses of forgotten lives, framed photos, faded quilts, medals in dusty cases. Every story tucked away like an exhibit no one visits anymore. In the TV lounge, a handful of residents sat in front of a muted game show, their faces blank as the flickering light danced over them. An old woman called out softly, "Has the bus come yet?" No one answered. I went back to my room and stared at the small table by the window. My suitcase was half unpacked, my clothes folded neatly by someone else's hands. On the nightstand lay the pocketknife, Ellen's gift, catching the dim light. That knife had built cribs, carved toy boats, cut rope on fishing trips. Now it sat useless, like the man who carried it. The loneliness pressed against me, heavier than the walls. I heard Walter's voice again, asterisk they send us here so they can forget we exist. Asterisk. That night, I couldn't sleep. The clock ticked too loudly. I thought about my daughter, about how she said wonderful place, and wondered if she believed it or just needed to. In the early hours, I took out a notebook from my bag. It was old, leather-bound, edges worn soft by time. Ellen had once used it for grocery lists. I'd kept it after she passed, maybe out of habit, maybe out of hope. I opened to a blank page and began to write. They call it care, I wrote, asterisk, but sometimes care feels like being quietly erased. Asterisk. The words came slow at first, then faster. I wrote about the silence, the loneliness, the way the hallways seemed to swallow sound. About Walter and his invisible months. About the nurse who smiled but never looked anyone in the eye. When I was done, I didn't know what I'd made. Maybe just proof that I was still here, still thinking, still capable of putting truth on paper. 2 days later, a volunteer collected the residents' mail. On a whim, or maybe a pulse of something I hadn't felt in years, I handed her my letter. Could you send this? I asked. She glanced at the envelope. To the Madison Herald. I nodded. Opinion section. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. Good luck, Mr. Carter. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the last sunlight spill across the parking lot. For the first time since I'd arrived, the air didn't feel quite so still. Walter passed by and saw the open notebook. Writing a letter, he asked. Something like that, I said. He chuckled. Careful, friend. Words can cause trouble around here. Maybe trouble's what this place needs. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. You might be right. The next morning, I saw him in the hallway, grinning like a man who'd remembered something worth keeping. Heard your letters making rounds already, he whispered. Paper must have liked it. I felt a flicker in my chest, not pride, exactly, but something close to being alive again. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a nurse humming down the hall. The sound was soft, almost kind. For the first time in weeks, I closed my eyes without dread. Maybe Ellen was right, strength wasn't in the house you built, but in the voice you refused to silence. And I knew then, I wouldn't let them turn me into a shadow. It started with a single letter. One page of truth written by a man nobody expected to speak again. A week after I mailed it, Carol, the nurse with the fixed smile, came into my room carrying a folded newspaper. You made quite the stir, Mr. Carter, she said, setting it on my tray. Half the staff's been talking about it. There it was. Asterisk Forgotten in the Golden Years, by Henry Carter. Asterisk they printed my name, even my quote about care feeling like erasure. Below it, a picture of the nursing home sign, leaning slightly to one side like it was tired of holding up its own promise. By noon, people started calling. Not me, they called the front desk, the director's office, the paper. Reporters wanted interviews, families wanted answers, former residents' children wanted to know if their parents had lived the same quiet misery I described. The staff didn't take kindly to the attention. The next morning, my breakfast came late. Then my evening walk wasn't on the schedule. When I asked about mail, Carol said it was being screened for safety. Walter winked at me. Looks like you kicked the hornet's nest, friend. Good, I said. Maybe the hornets needed waking up. That night, a young nurse named Sarah slipped me a note under my door. Asterisk, for what it's worth, some of us agree with you. Keep writing. Asterisk. I sat there for a long time, holding that scrap of paper. It wasn't rebellion that filled me, it was relief. Proof that truth still found its way through locked cabinets and polite silence. So I kept writing. Short notes about the residents, about Mary who hadn't had a visitor in 6 months, about Jim whose war medals hung crooked beside a bed that smelled of bleach. I didn't exaggerate, I didn't accuse. I just told the truth in the plain words a carpenter might use to describe a broken beam. 2 weeks later, another article appeared. Asterisk, letters from the inside, life in Golden Acres. Asterisk, my words, nearly untouched. This time, the response was louder. The paper's online edition lit up with comments, some angry, some tearful, many just ashamed. Reporters began showing up at the gate, cameras flashing through the bars. The director, Mr. Hollis, called an emergency meeting in the dining hall. He stood in front of 50 residents and twice as many staff, his voice too smooth to trust. Mr. Carter's statements, he said, do not reflect the overall quality of care we provide. We are committed to transparency and improvement. I raised my hand. Then why's my mail being opened before I get it? The room went quiet. His face flushed. That's a misunderstanding, sir. No misunderstanding, I said. You're afraid of sunlight, Mr. Hollis. But rot grows in the dark. A few residents chuckled softly. Walter slapped the table. He's right. That moment, small, quiet, almost respectful, broke something open. The fear that hung over this place like damp air began to lift. From that day, the staff grew divided. Some avoided me altogether, others gave me quick nods of approval when no one was watching. One evening, Sarah whispered as she passed me in the hall, the state's sending inspectors next week. Your letters did that. It should have made me proud, but instead, I just felt tired. Change, I'd learned, always came slower than decency demanded. Still, I kept at it. I wrote not out of spite, but because silence was heavier than paper. Then one afternoon, a man in a leather jacket appeared in the visitor's room. He introduced himself as Tom Reeves, reporter for the Asterisk Herald. Asterisk, the same man who'd published my letter. We talked for hours. About the system, about families, about how comfort can turn into neglect when profit gets involved. He listened like my words mattered. Before leaving, he asked gently, would you mind if I dug a little deeper into who funds this place? I shrugged. You'll find a lot of hands in that pocket. A week later, Tom returned, pale, determined. Mr. Carter, he said quietly, Golden Acres is owned by a private management company called Havenbrook Living. One of its major shareholders works for a consulting firm, your son-in-law's firm. I sat still, staring at the window where rain streaked the glass like veins. You sure? I asked. He nodded. Positive. I double-checked. I laughed, not bitterly, but the way a man does when irony stings more than anger. So that's the wonderful place they promised me. Tom's eyes softened. Would you let me tell this story publicly, with your name, your words, your connection? I thought about it a long moment. Ellen's face came to mind, calm and steady. Then Ben's, his small hands pressing the glass that day they drove me away. Yes, I said finally. Tell it all. Just tell it true. When the news broke, it was like watching the world wake up after a long nap. Television crews came. Headlines ran, asterisk elder care facility tied to conflict of interest scandal. Asterisk commentators argued, officials promised investigations. Golden Acres buzzed like a shaken beehive. And in the middle of it all, I sat quietly by my window, the pocketknife warm in my hand, feeling not victory, but gravity. I'd wanted to be heard. Now I was. And that, I knew, came with a cost. The morning after the story aired, Golden Acres felt different. The hallways were quieter, but not in the usual way. It was the hush of people listening behind doors, the kind that comes before a storm. Even the smell of disinfectant couldn't cover the tension. Walter shuffled into my room with a grin and a newspaper tucked under his arm. "You're on TV, Hank," he said. "Saw your face right next to the governor's statement about elder care oversight. Guess you're famous now." I smiled, though my stomach turned. I never wanted fame. I wanted fairness. Tom Reeves, the journalist, had done his digging. The report went live on a Sunday evening, right after the local football game, when half the county was watching. The headline read, "Conflict of Interest in Elder Care, When Family and Business Collide." Asterisk asterisk. They showed footage of Golden Acres, clips from my interview, and a chart that traced ownership back to a consulting firm, where, plain as day, Eric Latham, my son-in-law, was listed as regional director. The story wasn't cruel. Tom didn't paint anyone as a villain. He just let the facts breathe. My quotes played over slow shots of residents sitting by the windows. Asterisk, care isn't just food and medicine. It's remembering someone still belongs. Asterisk. By Monday, the phone at the front desk rang non-stop. Families wanted to move their parents out. A state investigator showed up by Tuesday, suit, clipboard, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hollis looked ready to faint. I watched from my window as reporters stood outside the gate, microphones like spears of light. Somewhere in that crowd, my daughter would see what she tried so hard to hide. That night, the director called me to his office. The blinds were drawn tight. Hollis tried to smile, but sweat had darkened his collar. "Mr. Carter," he began, "you've created a situation. Do you realize the damage you've caused?" I folded my hands. "I didn't cause anything, Mr. Hollis. I just opened a window." He leaned forward. "This facility provides essential services. You could ruin people's jobs, your own family's reputation." I stopped him with a small gesture. "My family made their choices. Now I'm making mine." His mouth twisted, but he didn't speak again. When I stood, I left my old carpenter's pencil on his desk. "You should measure what you build before it collapses," I said. Back in my room, Tom called. He said the story was spreading, regional news, even a national outlet had picked it up. "You've done something important, Hank. People are talking about reform, about oversight." I looked at the pocket knife on my bedside table, tracing the initials Ellen had carved there, *HC. A reminder that things built with care endure, even when people forget. "Talking's a start," I said. "But will they listen?" He hesitated. "They already are." Days passed, and the outside world began to seep in. Boxes of letters arrived, from strangers, veterans, nurses, even high school students who'd read the article in civics class. Some thanked me. Some shared their own stories, parents ignored, grandparents discarded, lives packed into storage like spare furniture. I kept each letter in a drawer, tied with a strip of flannel torn from one of Ellen's old shirts. She would have liked that, keeping hearts close to the things that once kept us warm. But with attention came risk. The facility's lawyer called to warn me about defamation concerns. I laughed softly. "You can't defame the truth," I told him. Then one afternoon, the front doors opened and a small film crew entered, followed by Tom. "We're doing a follow-up segment," he said, "if you're willing. The public needs to see your face, the man behind the words." They set up in the courtyard under the shade of a dying maple. The camera's red light blinked on. Tom asked questions, simple and steady. "What made you speak out?" I thought for a long moment. Because silence felt like betrayal. Not of myself, but of every soul who sits here thinking they don't matter anymore. He nodded. "Do you hope your daughter will see this?" I took a slow breath. "I hope she remembers who I was before she started counting my years like expiration dates." The segment aired that night. My words, my wrinkles, my trembling hands, all out there for the world to see. The next morning, the phone in the lobby rang again. Carol came to find me. "Your daughter's on her way," she said softly. "With reporters." I looked at her, calm as morning wood smoke. "Then it's time we both tell the truth." When she left, I turned to the window. The sky was gray, the kind that promised rain but never kept its word. I took the pocketknife from the nightstand, thumbed it open, then closed again. Ellen's voice echoed in memory, strong enough to last longer than we do. Maybe this was what she meant. Not about houses, not about fences, but about dignity. I straightened my collar and waited by the window, watching the driveway. I could already hear the faint hum of cameras in the distance. And this time, I wasn't afraid. They arrived just after lunch, when the smell of soup still lingered in the corridor and the TV in the lounge was muttering about a weather front from the west. Through the glass doors I saw the vans first, then the microphones like black tulips, and finally Melissa, hair pinned neat, face pale, eyes searching. Mr. Hollis tried to stage manage it in the lobby. "Let's take this in my office," he said, patting the air, a maitre d' at the end of his rope. But the cameras had already poured into the common room, and the residents, God bless them, did not move. We were not props anymore. Tom gave me a small nod. Sarah stood off to the side with a clipboard, jaw set, as if she could hold the room together with posture alone. Walter edged his wheelchair forward until he could see. Melissa saw me and started across the carpet, the soft squeak of her flats loud as a shout. She put out her arms. "Dad!" I didn't step back, but I didn't step in. The room tightened around the space between us. Her perfume was the same she wore at her wedding, jasmine and winter apples, and for a second the years folded like a drop cloth. Then Eric came into view behind her, in a navy suit, expression arranged for sympathy. "Mr. Carter," a bright-eyed reporter said, "are you willing to speak on camera with your daughter?" I looked at Melissa. "We've said less in private than we owe each other in public," I answered. "So yes." They clipped a microphone to my collar. The wire tickled the loose skin of my neck. My pocketknife weighed steady in my jacket like an anchor. Across the room, someone coughed, a spoon clinked, rain started tapping the windows. Melissa faced me, hands clasped. "Dad, she swallowed. "I never meant to hurt you. We thought this would be best. You fell twice. Ben needs space." There were a lot of factors. "Factors," I repeated, letting the word sit. "Like the consulting contract Eric's firm has with Havenbrook Living?" A ripple went through the room. Cameras leaned in. Eric's jaw tightened, but he managed a practiced half-smile. "With respect, Mr. Carter, my firm advises many companies. I have no say in individual placements." "You had a say in your house, though," Walter muttered, loud enough for a microphone to catch. A few residents chuckled, soft, not cruel. I reached into my folder, a plain manila thing Tom suggested I keep, and pulled out 3 papers. "I'm not here to argue memories," I said quietly. "I'm here to state facts." I held up the first, copies of checks. "These are the utilities I paid the last year, electric, water, cable. Not charity. Contribution." The second, a printed email thread, dates lined up like fence posts. "This is from the week before you packed my boxes." I read, "Without heat, if we move Dad by April, we can convert his room before the babies do." Melissa flinched. "Dad, that was planning," I said. "I understand planning." The third paper I kept a beat longer. The foam cover of a microphone brushed my knuckles. "This is a complaint filed with the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, case number and all. It documents male screening, delayed care plans, and a lack of resident counsels here." I looked at Mr. Hollis, whose lips had gone bloodless. Because the problem isn't only in my family. The room was so quiet I could hear the rain stop. Melissa's voice came small. I thought I was protecting you. You fell. You left the stove on. I was scared. I nodded. Fear is honest. I let her look at me, I let myself look back. But you don't protect someone by making them disappear. Her eyes filled, and for a moment I remembered her as a child, stubborn in pigtails, holding a crooked birdhouse I pretended was perfect. We needed the room, she whispered. The baby cried all night. Eric said, she caught herself, glancing sideways at him. We made a choice. And choices have weight, I said. You freed up a room, but lost a home in your heart. It wasn't a performance. It came out the way a level finds center, inevitable once you stop pushing. The cameras caught it anyway. A few people sucked in their breath, as if truth had a temperature. Eric stepped forward then, palms out, voice smooth. Let's be clear. Mr. Carter is receiving appropriate care. This facility meets state standards. Our family acted within reason. Within reason, I said, and within your interests. I kept my tone even, the way you talk to a young man holding the wrong end of a saw. This isn't about hating you, Eric. I don't. It's about naming what happened so we can stop doing it to people who can't push back. A reporter asked, Mr. Carter, what do you want now? An apology? A lawsuit? I shook my head. I want a door that opens both ways. Tom's eyebrows lifted. I lifted the folder again. I've signed a limited medical power of attorney, with a patient advocate from the county. I'll decide, with my doctor, where I live, and I'll do it on paper. I paused. And I want Golden Acres to post its resident rights and hold a council every month, like the law requires. With minutes. In the lobby. Where everyone can see. Sarah's chin trembled, she pressed her lips together. Mr. Hollis tried for a smile that never arrived. We already. You don't, Sarah said, quietly, finally. For a heartbeat you could hear the old clock in the hallway knock its way to 1:30. Melissa took a step closer. Her hands were shaking, but she did not reach for me. Dad, I'm sorry, she said. I forgot that you weren't furniture to be moved. I forgot who taught me to measure twice. 3 times when it's load-bearing, I offered, and a few people laughed, grateful to breathe. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, the way she used to when she skinned a knee. Can we try again? Not to erase what happened. Just, start where we should have. I let the question sit in the room with all of us. This was not the place for forgiveness dressed up for the 6 o'clock news. This was the place for clean edges. We can start, I said. That's not the same as finishing. Behind us, the rain began again, gentle as a broom on a porch. The cameraman lowered his rig. Walter exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since 1975. Eric started to speak, then stopped. He looked at his shoes. That was his first honest act of the day. I closed the folder and slid it beneath my hand. The pocketknife in my jacket tapped once against my ribs, a small, steady metronome. Thank you for coming, I said to Melissa. For standing here, not hiding. That's a start too. The reporter tried one more question. Mr. Carter, do you feel vindicated? No, I said. I feel visible. And the cameras, for once, showed what that looks like, not victory, not venom. Just a man refusing to be moved like a piece of furniture, and a daughter learning what it means to carry weight without dropping it. News spreads fast when guilt and truth travel together. By the end of that week, Golden Acres had become the kind of name people said in whispers, in grocery stores, at church, over kitchen tables. The governor's office ordered an official review, and Havenbrook Living, the company behind it all, began to crumble under the weight of its own paperwork. TV crews moved on to newer scandals, but their footage lingered online, me, standing beside my daughter, holding the paper steady while she cried. People shared it, called it courageous. But courage, I've learned, isn't loud. It's just the choice to stay still when others want you erased. Melissa called a few days later. "Dad," she said softly, "they're pulling Eric off the Havenbrook account. He's suspended. They might terminate him." Her voice trembled, and for the first time, she didn't sound like a mother or a wife, just a daughter, lost between duty and regret. "I didn't want to ruin anyone," I said. "But I won't apologize for telling the truth." "I know." A pause. Then quieter, "He pressured me, Dad. Said it was temporary. Said if we didn't move fast, we'd lose the deal and the house. I didn't even see the papers, just signed what he gave me." There it was, the quiet kind of confession that breaks something inside you, not out of anger, but sadness. She'd traded love for convenience, maybe without even realizing it. I wanted to hate him, to feel the clean fire of blame. But instead I felt old, tired, and strangely empty, as if the storm had passed and left behind a sky too wide for comfort. "Melissa," I said finally, "if you're asking for forgiveness, you already have it. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting." She cried harder at that, not because the words were cruel, but because they were honest. Later that week, Walter rolled up to my room, newspaper in hand. "They're shutting down 2 Havenbrook facilities for inspection," he said. "Guess you started something bigger than letters." I smiled faintly. "Didn't start it, Walt. Just stopped pretending it wasn't there." He laughed, a wheezing sound that ended in a cough. "You know, Hank, maybe this is what it means to be useful again." That night, I sat by the window with my notebook open. The courtyard below was quiet, rain had stopped, leaving everything silver and still. I could see the reflection of the apple tree outside, the one the residents had planted last spring. It was small, but its branches were reaching already. Tom called one last time. "The investigation's official," he said. "They're citing your story as the catalyst. You've done more than most politicians in a decade." I chuckled softly. "All I did was write a letter." "That's how revolutions start," he said. When I hung up, I turned the knife over in my hands, not as a weapon, but as memory. The blade had dulled, but it still caught the light. Ellen once told me, "A tool only loses its edge when you stop using it." Maybe the same was true for people. The next morning, Melissa visited again, without cameras, without makeup, without Eric. She brought Ben with her. The boy ran into the room like the world hadn't happened. "Grandpa. Mom says you might come home soon." Home. The word felt both fragile and familiar. Melissa stood behind him, holding a small box. "We went through your things," she said. "I think this belongs to you." Inside was my old carpenter's pencil, sharpened down to a stub. She smiled weakly. "You always said measure twice." I nodded. "And cut once." She looked down. "I cut too soon, didn't I?" I put the pencil back in the box and closed it gently. "You learned. That's what matters." As they left, Ben turned back at the door and waved. "I'll help you plant apples when you come back, Grandpa." I smiled. "You'd better." When they were gone, I sat a long while in the quiet. The room didn't feel like a cell anymore. It felt like a waiting place, not for death, but for returning. The papers on my desk rustled from the draft. Headlines, letters, apologies. I brushed them aside, letting one phrase from my article catch my eye. Remembering someone means refusing to forget yourself. I whispered it once aloud, like a prayer. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Spring came late that year. The snow melted slow, as if the earth itself was hesitant to start again. By April, the state finished its inspection, and I was cleared to leave Golden Acres. No celebration, no cameras, just a quiet signature, a handshake, and a cab waiting by the curb. The road home looked both familiar and foreign. New paint on old fences, a few houses sold, a few boarded up. But when we turned onto Maple Ridge Lane, the smell of damp earth and apple blossoms hit me like a memory stepping out of the past. The house stood the same, white siding, blue shutters, porch light still crooked from the day I hung it with Ellen. The front yard had been cleaned, freshly mulched. And by the gate stood Ben, clutching a sapling almost taller than himself. He ran up before I could step from the car. "Grandpa. We got your old shovel ready. Mom says this one's for you." Melissa followed, quieter, her hands folded. She'd aged in those months, not in face, but in humility. "Welcome home, Dad," she said softly. We planted the tree near the old fence line where my boxes once sat. The soil was rich and cold, the kind that clings to your hands like it knows you. Ben steadied the sapling while I packed the dirt. Melissa fetched the watering can. For a while, we didn't speak, just worked, breathing in rhythm. When the last bit of soil was pressed, Ben hung a small wooden tag from a branch. I leaned closer to read it. "Remembering means loving." I felt something in my chest loosen, not joy exactly, but release. The kind of peace that doesn't erase pain, just lets it rest. Melissa looked up, eyes red from more than the wind. "I can't undo what I did," she whispered. "But I can build better now. I want you here, not as a guest. As family." I smiled faintly. That's all I ever wanted. We stood there as the light faded, the young tree swaying gently in the evening breeze. Somewhere a bird called, one of those early robins Ellen used to say brought second chances. I brushed the dirt from my palms and looked at the house, at the porch, at the small flicker of life returning to what had been hollow. Home, I thought, isn't where you're placed. It's where someone waits for you to return. And as Ben slipped his small hand into mine, I knew Ellen was right all along. Some things, if built strong enough, really do outlast us. So tell me, friend, do you know what silence sounds like, when it finally forgives?